Hi everyone, Josh here at House Guitars, and I wanted to give you an overview today of how I clean up binding on an acoustic guitar, scraping and sanding. What I have here on the bench is a very simple OM shaped guitar, which is going to be a guitar bouzouki, and I've just completed the binding, gluing the binding yesterday. I pulled the tape, and so now I've got to get everything leveled out and cleaned up. And this is a fairly simple operation, and it shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't take too much time, but it's something that you do want to be careful with as well. It's easy to sand or scrape away your binding, which is not very thick, and if you're not very careful, you can ruin your binding job in the cleanup process. So the tools for doing this are fairly simple, and you see them here on the bench. So what I have is a couple scrapers, and these are probably the most common kind of scrapers that you'll see nowadays. This is just a typical cabinet scraper. Get these at lots of woodworking stores. Got mine at Lee Valley Tools. You can make them. Sharpen with a file typically. I'm not going to get into that on this video. This is the other type of scraper that's become quite popular. This is a solid metal scraper, originally developed by luthier Alan Carruth from the US, and Alan actually gave me this scraper, which he had either made or had made for him many years ago when I was exhibiting with him at the Montreal guitar show, the old guitar show, which has been gone for many years. And Stu Mack started producing these and selling them a few years ago now, and a lot of people just love them. I don't have a good setup for sharpening this right now, otherwise I would be using it, but I'm going to be using this one in the video. So the other thing that you'll need is some hard sanding blocks. These are just mahogany sanding blocks that I use, and flat. You don't want any kind of padded sanding block for this. That won't be helpful. So let's get right to it. Okay, so one other thing I should point out is that I glue all my bindings with fish glue. Now, if you're not familiar with fish glue, it is an animal protein glue. A lot of the same characteristics as hide glue, except it's not a hot glue, which makes it easier in some cases to use. Downside is it's very sticky. Tends to get on your fingers, and it's a little bit messy, but the reason I like it, especially for binding, is that it dries super hard, and it is easier to sand and to scrape than a lot of other glues. Now, if I was to just take my cabinet scraper and start attacking the glue and the binding here, what I find is that my scraper is catching and kind of bouncing over some of the glue spots. So what I do is I take one of my hard sanding blocks, and this is 100 grit sandpaper, and I start by just kind of quickly going over the part that I'm working on. And what that does is it removes any sharp edges to the glue that are going to catch the scraper. It just kind of rounds everything out, so that now when I go back with the scraper's not going to catch on the glue. It's actually going to help smooth it out. Now, if there's hard bits of glue, your scraper will continue to ride over that glue. So I continue to alternate between the scraper and the sanding block. With these scrapers, couple things just in regards to technique. If you haven't done this, start by rounding the corners off on your scraper. If you have sharp corners there, it's just way too easy to dig the scraper into the guitar and scratch or ding your very nice guitar body. So round out those corners, and it's helpful generally to put a little bit of flex into the scraper. You can just do that by holding it, thumbs in the center, fingers on the side, and just pushing a little bit. The other thing that I always do is I always have approximately 2/3 of the scraper over top of the body, and just 1/3 maybe hanging out over the edge. And so what that does is it ensures that I am leveling the binding with the surface of the body. If you pull it out over here, even halfway, it's too easy to tip off the edge, and what you can end up doing is beveling your binding, which is not what you want to do. If you end up taking too much of the binding off like that, you won't have any left for rounding it over or finishing it. So again, approximately 2/3 over. These scrapers work very well by either pushing or pulling. And depending on what section I'm working on, I will either push or pull. And it really doesn't take much to clean it up. Now, this is partly dependent on how good of a job you do installing the binding. You want it just a hair proud of the surface on the back and on the sides. If you have it sticking up a lot, you're going to have a lot more glue and a lot more material that you have to clean up. But that's all it takes. This is now cleaned up right in here, and so I can just proceed around the whole guitar that way. And the top is exactly the same as the back. When you come around the end of the guitar here, you got to be a little more careful. If you're going at it with a scraper like this, it's very easy for your scraper to catch the wood as it goes across the grain and kind of tear some of it out. So I typically do this part right along either the top or the bottom of the guitar, primarily with the sanding block, always going in the direction of the grain, just so that I don't leave big scratches. And I'm following a similar principle, the kind of the 2/3, 1/3 principle with my sanding block, where I have 2/3 of the block over the surface that I want to level things out to, and just approximately 1/3 hanging off the back side of the guitar. And I'm careful again to keep most of the pressure over the body, so I'm not rounding it off. It is way too easy to round stuff off if you're not careful, and that becomes super critical when you're doing this area here for the fretboard and neck joint. If you round that off, it becomes difficult to sand and restore a nice clean edge there, which you're going to need for a clean neck joint and the fretboard. Cleaning up binding on the side of the instrument, you follow the exact same principles. I start with my block. There tends to be a little more glue and stuff here that could get in the way, so I start with my sanding block. Remove any of those sharp glue edges. Come back with the scraper. Again, it's the 2/3, 1/3 principle. Most of the scraper is over the sides. And your scraper should be producing shavings as opposed to like a powdery dust. I'm getting some shavings here I could probably use to touch this up by now. But it's well worth taking the time to regularly sharpen your scraper. It'll just help speed up the process. And again, I will just continue to alternate back and forth between the scraper and the block. And following this method, it's very easy, relatively quick process to clean up the binding. Here I've got my guitar vise. These are kind of known as the guitar troji is what they become the popular name for it. It's just a floor standing plywood vise that you can use to hold your guitar during these type of cleanup operations. So if you like the video, please subscribe to my channel. You'll find lots more content for both builders and guitar players. And thanks for watching.